welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Sunshine Zee, and if you are new to this channel, you are most welcome, and I would like for you to subscribe if you feel that this is the kind of content that you resonate with. If you're a returning subscriber some people return but they're not subscribed. If you're a returning subscriber, I appreciate you. If you're returning, please do consider subscribing. I started with this particular topic, which is gender-based violence, last week, and I shared a story about how I witnessed it, and that was the first story. I'm going to share the second story in today's video. But before I do so, you might be wondering why gender-based violence? Why do I speak about this? And I want to just speak in particular about gender-based violence perpetrated towards women in South Africa. The stats about being a woman in this country are just shocking, and in fact it's one of the most unsafe places in the world for a woman. So in commemoration of Women's Month, I just wanted to highlight this particular issue. So I'm gonna just read some stats, and these are from the Mail and Guardian, and this article was actually written in December 2020, and it says that 51% of women in South Africa say they've experienced GBV, which is gender-based violence, with 76% of men saying they've perpetrated GBV at one stage in their lives. And this is from just Gauteng. So Gauteng is a province in South Africa. That's the province I currently stay at. And it goes on to say in 2019-2020, a total of 2,695 women were murdered in South Africa. This means a woman is murdered every 3 hours in South Africa. That's just how bad things are. And there's TV programming actually. There's a TV show called Ufeleni, and this program is quite intense in that it shows just how frequently gender-based violence happens, but also just how frequently femicide happens in South Africa. And unfortunately, it's something that continues to grow because nothing is done. Perpetrators are let off. There's just a lot that does not happen as it should. The reason I wanted us to speak about this is because it's easy for us to blame the government and the law enforcement, and we should. They are not doing nearly enough. They're not even doing anything really to scratch the surface of these issues, because these issues are not just issues about violence. They're issues about social issues. They're issues about, I mentioned in the first story, how people are raised and the kind of environment people are raised in. I spoke about how being a young girl in South Africa and not having access to basic things such as food. In South Africa, there's people who still do not have food. They don't have access to sanitary pads. They don't have access to just basic things. They unfortunately have to then rely on a man to provide those, and as a result, if that man ends up abusing them in some way, they have no choice but to stay in that relationship. They don't have a say. They can't stand up against the perpetrators. So my question is, what do we do? And I know it's a difficult question. I myself can't answer it, but I wanted us to have a conversation around that, in that maybe somebody out there might have views as to what do we as individuals, as responsible citizens of this country, do besides hide, because that's what I'm doing. I'll be honest, that's what I'm doing. I can't even take a walk around my neighborhood if it's too dark, because it's just not safe for me to do so. So what do? I just hide. I don't address anything, and I can't even tweet about it, because what has the tweeting helped with? Every time a young woman in South Africa, well, especially young women, I think we resonate more because there's a lot more young people in South Africa than there are older people. And every time a young person is killed, and it comes to the news, not all cases, because there's too many cases, as you heard from these stats, there's too many cases. But every time a case makes the headlines, people tweet. But then what? What happens then? What happens after? And perhaps I don't know. Perhaps you can tell me what happens then. Let me just read more statistics. It says femicide is 5 times higher in South Africa. 5 times higher in South Africa than the global average. This is shocking to me, not because it's not true. I actually think that it is very accurate, but I think what blows my mind about it is just how close to home it is, because if we go by these stats, then this happens a lot more regularly than we care to admit. So this happens to our colleagues, this happens to the lady you see at gym, that this happens to just about anyone, right? Because we sometimes tend to think it happens to only a certain type of people, such as the story that I told last week, and I'll get into this story and it will show you that it happens so many times, and it doesn't matter what kind of background you're from, it doesn't matter whether you have money or you don't have money, it still happens. Well, I do believe that if you don't have money, it's more likely to happen, but you'll see from the story that it happens very, very close to home. I'm now going to share the second time I witnessed gender-based violence. I guess you could say close by, but not really, but yeah. So this took place a couple of years ago. I had just moved to this place, and it was, I'm not sure if it was a Sunday. I suspect it was a Sunday, but it was an evening, and I remember very well, I was in my bedroom and I was texting back and forth with my friend. So I'm one person that I sleep very late, usually it's just how I am, and it was a bit late. I think it was around 11 p.m. and the later it gets, obviously the quieter it becomes. And I remember as I was busy texting with my friend and preparing to go to bed, I started hearing people arguing, and you know, I was startled by it because it was the first time I had heard this. So now I was wondering what's happening, and you know, when you're inside and you don't know, should I go outside, what should I do, where's this coming from? And I think initially a part of me was just being nosy. I'll be honest, it was just being nosy to say, oh, which couple is fighting, until I realized just how serious this was, because then I started hearing banging noises. I started actually hearing him, or somebody beating somebody up, right? Because I then realized that it's upstairs that this is taking place, and I wasn't sure as to what to do. I think for some time I kind of froze, and I told myself, perhaps it's not what I think it is. But it was pretty clear that he was beating her up, because soon after she was screaming, and then a baby started crying. So I remember calling my friend. I'm not sure if I called her or I sent her a voice note saying, I don't know what to do, should I go? I think I'm gonna go. So I was happy that at least there was somebody on the end of the line that I could talk to about this, and I ended up saying to her, I think I'm going to go. So unfortunately I needed to get out, not go there. What was I going to do there? But I needed to go out of my house and go call security, because unfortunately they don't have a phone in the security booth where you can maybe access the security personnel to come and assist with any kind of incident or anything like that. So I now have to go out, so risking my own safety. But I mean, I felt fairly safe. It's just I was scared of what was happening. I wasn't sure where exactly this was taking place. I knew it was upstairs, but I didn't know how out of hand the situation would get. So I literally just ran to the security's office, and I'm there. I get there and I'm in a panic, and I said to them, listen, there's a fight happening. My upstairs neighbors are having a fight, and I think he's beating her up. You need to help me. Right now, perhaps I was naive, but I honestly thought that their reaction would be something that had a sense of urgency. Instead, they were not really bothered. They were not bothered. And I think it speaks to how people react to these situations. They were not really bothered. Actually, it was the one security. I'm lying. It's the one security. The other one was busy patrolling, right? And he said to me, listen, there's nothing I can do. The other one is busy patrolling. As soon as he comes back, I'll let him know, and then perhaps he'll come there. So I was sent back to my place with no assistance. And as soon as I got back, these people are still screaming at each other. It hasn't stopped. And I don't know whether to go upstairs. But what am I going to do? Like I'm saying, I don't know if this person has a weapon. So I'm not going to put my life in danger. Being a woman myself, I couldn't possibly overpower him if we got into any kind of a struggle. So I came back to my place. Fortunately, the second security guard had somewhat of a sense of urgency. So he actually came back right before I closed my door, and he said, hey, are you the one that reported the incident that's going on upstairs? And I said, yes. And I said, can you hear them? Because they were still going at each other. And he said, yes, I can hear them. And the other one also came, and then they both said, okay, we're gonna go upstairs and we're gonna check out what's happening. So they go upstairs, and I go halfway up the stairs, because I didn't want them to see me. And that's what's awkward about the whole situation, is because these are people that you see every morning. I had only seen the husband. I had actually never seen the woman. I had seen the husband, and I had seen him with his sons, and he was very friendly. We'd always greet each other. I had only been here a few months, but still, the few times I had seen him, he had his little boys, and I'd always greet them and just sort of play with the boys. So I knew, even the baby who was crying, I knew that it was the baby who had just started walking. So as much as I didn't know them, I didn't know their names, I knew them in the sense that I had seen these people. So I didn't want them to see me at this point. So the security guard knocks on the door very loudly, just basically banging down the door, and it stopped. The screaming stopped, and the door opened, and the security guard inquired as to what's happening in here. We hear a report of crying, a baby crying, and the guy said, no, there's nothing wrong with the baby stopped crying, and he was so quick to defend himself to say the baby stopped crying. But then the lady actually started screaming, help me, while she's inside. And the other security guard, so the one security guard is the one who was brave enough to knock, and the one was like where I could see him, and he said to me, she's bleeding, and she's bleeding very badly. I can see her, she's bleeding. And I just remember having those memories of a woman bleeding, and she was like, help me. And then he said to the security guard, no, don't get involved in this, brah, don't get involved in this, this B word. And she went into my emails, and he starts actually telling us the story, and she whatever, she started going into details about what she had done and why he had basically beaten her up. And that security guard was really like, I think he handled it quite well in the sense that he didn't accuse him of anything, because I think he understood that it wasn't his place to accuse him of anything. But I think in that way, he made this guy calm, if I can put it that way, because the whole situation got diffused, and he wasn't saying anything. He didn't accuse them of anything. He didn't even get involved in the whole story. He just listened and said, listen man, you just need to stop beating her. Just leave her alone. I hear you, but just leave her alone. Otherwise you're gonna put me in a situation where I have to call the police, and you wouldn't want me to do that. Now, if I think about that, as much as he managed to calm the situation down, but if you listen to what he's saying to this guy, it speaks so much to our society and how we handle these things, where we say, you don't want to go to the police, which, I mean, wouldn't have helped anyways. But that's besides the point. He didn't threaten this guy. He didn't do anything for this woman. In fact, the guy who was scared, the security number 2, was the one, I think, who felt this woman's pain. You know, when he looked at me and he said, I can see her, she's bleeding. I could tell he was so scared. I could tell that he had never actually experienced this. And so after a few minutes of talking to him and, you know, telling him that, listen, if you continue, you're gonna have to call the police. This guy then stopped, and then he closed the door, and then we all came back downstairs, and he said to me, I don't think they'll continue, so it's all good. And I said to him, but shouldn't we call the police still? You know, because he said she's bleeding, and he said, you know what, it's none of our business, and sorry to have to tell you, but this is not the first time that this has happened. And I think that's what broke my heart, because I was like, oh, you know, so it's not the first time. And he said to me, the situation is that she doesn't work, and she probably just started something. So he kind of basically blamed her in a sense, but once again, it speaks to the society that we live in. And they gave me their personal numbers to call them should it happen again, and they had said, well, if it does happen again, we will have to call the police. And they left. And what's ironic in these situations is that I wasn't beaten up. I wasn't anywhere near that situation, but it will always live with me. There's a psychological scar with me, especially because I then tried to calm myself down. I spoke to my friend about what had happened. I relayed the whole story to her, and I think I almost immediately made peace with the fact that law enforcement was not going to be called into the situation. And I remember I said, you know what, let me just sleep. And I couldn't even sleep, you know, because of just the trauma of having experienced that. But as I went to bed and switched off the lights and everything, I could actually hear her still crying, because I think she was crying in her bathroom. I'm sorry, but it's just, I can never forget how she cried. She cried until 1 a.m. that day. And I remember when she stopped crying, because that's when I stopped crying. And I wished I could do something for her, and I couldn't. And that's the reality of it, is that I could have tweeted, what would that have helped? I could have called the police, but what would that have helped? What do we do? What do we do about the situation that we find ourselves in as South African women? What do we do for ourselves? What do we do for those around us? What do we do is my question for you today. This happens much closer than we care to admit. It happens to people we didn't even think that it would happen to. And I don't want to go on and on, but what can be done? Is there any hope for South Africans? How can we make sure that our daughters don't have these kinds of stories to share? How can we put a stop to it? I'd like you to share with me any thoughts, any ideas, any work that you might be doing in order to try and stop this, or at least mitigate some of these situations. What are you doing about it? I mean, obviously, we pray, we look to God for answers, but my question is, how do we put a stop to gender-based violence? Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Love and light to you all.